I do keep repeating myself, but it's because I want you guys to recognize it, sort of the consistency week by week, and understand where we're situated. That Genesis 3 to 11, it's about a consistent fall. And so Genesis 6 and the story of the Nephilim, the sons of God and the daughters of humanity, it has a lot to do with that. Because remember, Daniel said something about toward the end of last week's meeting. So when we're talking about these powers and principalities, these rulers of darkness in the heavenly places, we're not just talking about flesh and blood, right? We don't wrestle with flesh and blood, it says. And do you remember what you said? No? Daniel said, well, could we be talking about corporations? Could we be talking about institutions? That was a big point that I wanted to hit home. When you think of the Nephilim, you're not supposed to be thinking about just these beings that walked on two legs and roamed the earth at one point. You need to be thinking about the kingdoms that they brought about, that they were, the founders and leaders of, and how those institutions, they are understood in the Bible to be these like demonic institutions. You see what I'm saying? These like kingdoms that need to be vanquished, essentially. And so when Israel goes into the land, the promised land later on in the Bible, and they start taking out these giants, they're taking out their kingdoms, right? They're taking out their institutions, because it's the institutions of the world that need to be baptized, in a sense. They need to undergo a destruction because they are built by evil. And the thing that what they're built by is they're built by a marriage between human evil and spiritual evil. So there's a power, the sons of God, who come down and give birth with the humans to these entities, these organizations. I'm not saying that it's all metaphor. I guess I'm just saying that you need to expand your sense of what it means to have the Nephilim and what the Nephilim represent. Okay, so for those who weren't here last week, that might be confusing what I'm saying right now. But the Nephilim meeting, it's recorded. So you guys had to leave early, but did you guys kind of get what we were talking about? Anyone lost on the whole Elohim, sons of God thing? Did that make sense? We're covered on everything. Everyone feels good? If not, you can go back and watch the recording, right? It's up there.
We
Bob?
may get into this today, but the thing that if you got kind of backtrace before the fall, both in heaven and on earth, that God created and endowed certain authorities into that creation.
Yeah.
And so when things fell, then you begin to see these distorted authorities in terms of
You're right.
of evil, in terms of not God's design.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Why are we in a situation where we've read about the creation, and we had a few weeks that were really, really good, and then now, since Genesis chapter 3, things have been unraveling? It's because of the fact that it says in those creation chapters that God gives authority to his creatures, as you have just said, right? So the idea here is that to be an image of God, or to be an angel of God, or to be this creature that is endowed with responsibilities by God, it's up to us to walk in line with that responsibility or to abandon that responsibility. That's what taking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is all about, is that they are abandoning their responsibility to walk in line with what was commanded, right? And so the same thing is true of the story of the sons of God and the daughters of men, right? That they are given, it's these beings that are given authority, and then they shirk that authority, they subvert it, and they give birth to all sorts of wickedness, right? So good point.
So evil or the dragon is an imitator and it's opposite.
Mm.
It uses good for evil, and so it's an artificial.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really good. He's making the point, which is a true biblical point, that evil does not coexist with God, right? God is eternal. Evil is not eternal. Evil comes about when, like, it's not equal forces of good and evil that coexist for all eternity, right? It's God who is good and eternally exists, pre-exists the universe. And when he creates, creation goes into a distortion, and that's what evil is. So philosophically speaking, evil doesn't have its own essence. It's the absence of what God is, essentially, and what his design is. And so that's a really important point. It's a distortion, it's a disruption, right? And we've talked at length about this, about again how the Satan is said to be a fallen angel, right? What does that mean? He wasn't bad in the first place, right? God didn't create him evil. He chooses. And getting into the other big point of the Genesis 6 event is you don't have to sort of infer or guess, oh, at what point do we get the origin or the birth of demons, right? The birth of spiritual entities that are evil. We have that story in verbatim in the Bible. It's in Genesis chapter 6. So just something to think about also. It's like if ever you had someone ask you the question, oh, so according to the Bible, when is that a thing? You know what I mean? When does that start? Just point them to Genesis chapter 6.
They don't always appear evil either. They appear as angels of the light.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Really difficult sometimes to discern.
To discern.
To discern unless you really are into the word.
Yeah, so that's another good point is when we're talking about the birth of the Nephilim and the story of the Nephilim, we talk about how these extra biblical stories, they like these other versions of that story, like with the Apkallu and stuff like that, or even in Enoch, it says this as well, the apocryphal book. It says that they traded knowledge as well, right? So it's not just that they gave birth to the Nephilim, but they also trade knowledge, right? And so the idea is that the spirits, right, that they want to pull you away into the worship of themselves as opposed to God, right? As opposed to Yahweh. And so they will do whatever it takes to entice you. They're not just there to scare you into submission,
And
right?
smart.
Yeah. Anyone read the Screw Tape Letters?
Yeah.
Yeah. Our resident C.S. Lewis scholar here has. Yeah. It's C.S. Lewis writing, and it's a fictional, imaginative story where Lewis is writing in the persona of a demon, and he's writing to a lesser demon that this demon is training. His nephew, yeah. So here's a demon that's up and coming, right? And here's a senior educated demon, and he's training him how to be a demon essentially. And it goes over all of the trickery and the ways in which, anyway, it's very imaginative and stuff. So anyway, okay, so are you guys ready? You feel good and caught up? I want to turn you guys attention to, I was thinking this week, just the schedule. This is the second to last week in Genesis 1 to 11. Okay. So we're already starting to speed up a little bit. We're going over 3 chapters today, where in the past weeks we've only really been doing 1. We're starting to speed up a little bit. We will start to speed up a lot because we have 2 weeks on Abraham. After that, we have 2 weeks on Jacob, 2 weeks on Joseph, and then we're into Exodus. So then we'll be done with Genesis. Does that make sense? So we are going to be, this is a big book to get through, right? And we're still in chapter 6. So does that make sense? And this is our 9th week. So congratulations everyone for coming. 9 weeks. So yeah, this week is the flood. Next week is the Tower of Babel story. And then Abraham, 2 weeks on Abraham and things like that. Okay. Does that make sense? So we'll be speeding up a little bit. With that, it's still a while from now, but I also want you guys to think about, this is a multimedia class. Lots of slides and videos and things like that. I was thinking when we get to the book of Exodus, towards the start, we can have a extra movie meetup, and you guys can bring as many snacks as you want, popcorn, and we can potluck it, and we can turn on the Prince of Egypt, if anyone's seen it.
Oh, yeah.
Who's seen the Prince of Egypt? Award-winning movie. Yeah, incredible. And then when we get to the story of Saul, and we could watch at least an episode of House of David. And then when we get to the crucifixion, we could watch Passion of the Christ. So if you guys are interested, I'll just have to coordinate and find a meet time. I wouldn't think it would be on our normal Sunday morning. It would be like sometime during the week or on Friday or something. And then, yeah. So if you guys are open to that, I was thinking about that this week, and it could be more supplemental resources for the study is watching those movies and stuff. Okay.
It really pulls at the heartstrings.
Yeah. Prince of Egypt is like one of my favorite movies. So
What's it about?
yeah, it's about Moses and the Exodus. Yeah. So it's got all like the ton of famous actors in it: Jeff Goldblum and Val Kilmer and Michelle Pfeiffer and Ray Fiennes, and yeah, so amazing. Voldemort plays Pharaoh. Yeah, Voldemort. Anyway, all right, you guys ready for today? Okay, so we're talking about prehistory. Remember what prehistory is? Prehistory is the time before recorded history, right? And that means that we're talking about things. This is like my third or fourth week of saying this, but I'm just going to say it again, that we're talking about hundreds to thousands of years of history that is packed into tiny little chapters of a book, right? And so there's a lot there that it's just giving you the details that you need to know. And why is it doing that? It's because prehistory, there are elements of prehistory across cultures, of the most ancient cultures, that they have certain elements that are consistent across all of their consecutive prehistories, right? And what were those things? The dawn of the world? What was the second thing? No, sorry. The origin of the leaders, which we went over last week, right? So how did people come to rule and what gives them the right to rule? And then number 3 was the flood. Really important for you to recognize, and I'll give you examples of this today, that when we talk about the flood in our contemporary culture, we talk about it as though it's a biblical story, right? In the time in which the story of the flood was written in the Bible, it was not a biblical story. It was just reality. It was just what happened. And that's why we have the biblical story, but we also have all these other iterations of that story. It's virtually the same story. Some of the details are different, but throughout all of these ancient cultures, you have the same essential story about the flood, the man that was chosen to survive the flood, and how that's like an essential moment of human history for the ancient people. Like that's a foundational moment, because that's the moment at which we have now transitioned from, as I have talked about, like this glorious further ancient past flood, and now we're in their mind, like the modern day. You see what I'm saying? In their mind, now we're like in the present. And once upon a time, there was a flood, and even before that, there was a human civilization before that. When we're talking about prehistory, Genesis is covering its bases, you could say, on those bullet points of, like, if you're going to talk about the beginning of the world, here are the things that we need to talk about. And now we're getting to that. We're getting further to, once we come out of the flood, now it's going to be now it's the world of the present. You see what I'm saying? And the civilizations that are born out of that are the world of the present, right? Something with that. Genesis does have its own things that are unique to the Bible. That would be the garden and the garden fall. And it would be also the Tower of Babel story, is also a unique one. And the Cain and Abel story and things like that. But they do have some conventions. The point here that I'm trying to say is we are reading something that, again, you learned about in Sunday school probably at one point with like little cartoons or things like that. It's one of the most ancient stories you will ever have an opportunity to read. Okay? Because it is one of the most ancient stories of all. The most ancient literature that we have, like actual tablets of, is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of the flood is included. And do you guys remember who Gilgamesh is? Gilgamesh is said to be 2/3 Apkallu, right? Apkallu being, in the Sumerian version of the story, the sons of God who come down, right, and give birth to the Nephilim. He's said to be a giant. Anyway, so the Epic of Gilgamesh has the flood story in it, okay? In that version, it says he meets the person who survived the flood and stuff like that. So does that make sense, guys? So just understand that this is a very, very ancient story that we're about to read, and it's really awesome. So the flood is coming directly after Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, the story of the Nephilim. Okay. We could say it's a response. It's an immediate response, and that's how much ancient interpretation took the story of the flood, is that it is God saying, now is the time to essentially wreck shop and start over, because this is getting completely out of hand and completely beyond the purpose, the plan and purpose and design of what I would want for my creatures. And so it's the moment at which God chooses to come and do something about it, right? Hit the reset button, right? And remember that the earth is described as being filled with violence. Why is that?
Well, because of Cain and Abel.
Okay.
Because of Cain.
Oh,
There
you have to have an Abel for Cain.
you go. Yeah, so the story of Cain and Abel starts that ticking time bomb, you could say.
Put a stamp on Cain, like, the sign.
Uh-huh. Right.
And then he goes off. He's supposed to be traveling, but again,
He builds a city.
he builds a city, and then from there, it was kind of adopted that
This is the way of the world. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And Lamech is even more violent, so we have this descent. And then what is it said the Nephilim are?
the bastards of gods and
Yeah, right. But what is the text says? They were mighty warriors, right? They were mighty warriors. So
of the kings. And
Mhm.
everything.
the idea of these great conquering kings that are warring with each other, right? That are setting up these empires, these world empires that are at war with each other. Okay. So that's something else, right? So while Genesis 1 and 2 told of God bringing order out of chaos to give his creatures a realm to flourish in, now the work of God is increasingly corrupted and undone upon the earth as his creatures destroy everything that he has lovingly gifted to them. Be just reminded for a second of what is happening in the murder of Abel. How is it described? It's described as, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. Your brother's blood has opened its mouth wide to receive your brother's blood from your hand, is what it says, right? And the idea here is that Adam was taken from the dust of the earth, from the ground, right? And then what happens in the killing of Abel is that work that God produced, the composition that he made, is now decomposed on the ground. So God brought things together, he created life, and then Cain slayed or slew Abel, and that life has now been reversed, right? And so what is being represented in a world filled with violence is that happening again and again and again and again and again, right? Where the evil and sin of humanity is the undoing of what God has intended, and what the life that has been given to humanity is now being reversed, you could say. Out of this realm, out of this world, Noah is chosen, right? Noah is chosen. And why is that important? This is just still a little bit of recap from last week. What does that represent?
Noah represents like the hope.
Noah represents the one who is chosen by God, the one who is selected or anointed by God to be a savior figure. It's when he is born, it says that the people say, in this one we will find rest or relief. Okay? This one we will find relief from the toil of the work of our hands, right? So the idea is humanity is dying, right? They're being killed in this violence, and they will die in the flood. But in the representative one, the figure that is Noah, there will be a salvation, okay? A salvation of humanity, okay? Does that make sense?
Read something about his name, rest, means rest, but the rest is not taking a nap. It's are ordered.
Yeah, that's a great note from that video.
The disorder, now he's bringing.
Now he's bringing it back. Yeah. So I was asked this week, why does God not just choose to send Jesus, to send the Messiah at this point? I was asked that this week, and I personally, I don't know about you guys, I personally think that that's sort of a misunderstanding of what's going on in the story. You could say the Logos has not become incarnate, right? At this point, God has not come down in an incarnate human flesh form. The union between heaven and earth in Jesus has not happened yet. But what is happening in the story of Noah is what happens in the story of Jesus. That is, the representative one is secures salvation on behalf of all humanity. So God tasks this person, right, to be the figure through which humanity will undergo the trial and tribulation and come through the other side, right, unscathed. That is the story of Noah. It's the first time, you could say, in the Bible that we have that story of the figure who is chosen to represent the people and bring them through the trial. The next big time we're going to have that story is going to be the story of Moses, right, and the Passover, right? It's the same sort of thing where the angel of death goes through, Egypt, and Moses, through his, connection, through him being an intercessor to God, gives the Israelites a way to be preserved in the judgment. So that's what's going on in the story of Noah. It's the same sort of thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting question that you bring up, and then I don't know if it quite answered it for me. Like, so instead of having Noah and then Moses, why not just bring Jesus then and there? Instead of going through that flood and all the things, yeah, why not just have Jesus?
Well, because the idea here is that the same sort of thing is happening time and again. You could say every time that you have moments like this, it is God acting in the same way that he acts through Jesus, right? What happens in the incarnation has to come at that point in history after we've gone through all this story, and when we get to that point, we can talk a bit more about that. But the point here is that the incarnation isn't necessarily going to solve things right then and there. You see what I'm saying? We still deal with evil in the world, right?
There was a parable, I'm just now thinking of after I asked the question. There's something about a farmer that would sent like his worker or something like that.
Yep.
And then last sent his son, and they still killed his son.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Like a first attempt. Not such a grand
Right.
attempt at first, just a first attempt, then second with Moses, and then lastly, it's like, we're going to all send my son.
Yeah. It's not an attempt in that God is failing each time. It's these are steps toward, you could say, here's a metaphor, steps on a hierarchy as you move upward. You know what I mean? Toward like the pinnacle. You could say something like that. Every type of Christ is leading to the antitype, which is the fulfillment, right? And so every notch of the pattern is leading to like the ultimate reason for that pattern. And so I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make. It's like, it's not that, like, it's a hypothetical for one thing, and that's not really fair to the story, is to just be, well, what about this and what about that? But also the point here is that it sort of misunderstands what is happening in the story. Like, here's an example. Israel is wandering in the wilderness, in the book of Numbers, in the book of Deuteronomy and things like that. And there's a story where Moses goes up to a rock per the instruction of God. They're parched, right? They're not able to have water because they're in the desert. And Moses goes up to a rock at the direction of God, and God says, I will stand in front of the rock, and you strike the rock, and water will flow from the rock. Okay? And Moses does that. He strikes the rock, and a big burst of water comes forth from the rock. What does Paul say in the New Testament? He says Christ was the rock. You see what I'm saying?
From which living waters flow.
From which living waters flow, right? So Jesus is present in all these moments, is the point that I'm trying to make. The incarnation is a very particular point in human history where everything comes together. You see what I'm saying? Where all of the patterns and the types, they come together in a unity, to where now there's a flesh and blood individual, a genuine person who undergoes this same process and reveals fully, manifests fully the image of God, right? So, does that make sense?
Yeah. If I were to put it to like a parable of my own, it's much like just trusting the grand design. And if like I didn't get a flat tire this morning, then I would have gotten into an accident. So like everything is happening.
Sure. And the New Testament is very particular about God had planned this from the very beginning. Remember, the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. I guess the point here that I'm trying to make is it why didn't God send Jesus now? I'm saying he is doing the same sort of thing that is the pattern of Jesus throughout the story, right? This is a particular moment in history. When Jesus comes is a particular moment in history, but it's the same sort of pattern. You follow me there, everyone? Okay, cool. I said that there was great violence in the earth, right? Jesus says this. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Okay, so there's great violence. Very interesting. But there's also eating and drinking and being merry, right? So we have to nuance our understanding of what it looks like for the world to be full of violence. For the world to be full of violence, it doesn't just mean that it's like an apocalyptic zombie world. That might not be what you're supposed to be imagining. For it to be full of violence, it might also be very decadent at the same time.
Right, because they also made like engineering equipment. They had arts and music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it talked about the technologies of humanity being brought up in that time as well, right? And so I guess I'm just trying to go to show that like another example of a great human empire throughout the Bible is going to be like Babylon or Rome, and the prophets are going to condemn them for how wealthy they are as nations, right? As they're so decadent. You see what I'm saying? And it's just something to think about, okay? As you're imagining this period of the era or the civilization prior to the flood, okay? Again, don't think like Book of Eli. Anyone seen that movie? You know what I mean? Or any time you see like, oh, it's just completely like just a wasteland with bandits roaming and things like that. It might not be exactly that. The idea here is a great ancient human civilization that was thrown down by God. Okay? Does that make sense?
And when you do violence to something, it can be almost anything.
Yeah.
You do violence to the natural order of eating, you've got glut.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. That's a really good point. Okay, so let's do the reading and then we will get into the slides proper. Does that sound good? All of that was sort of catch up and set up for what we're doing. So like last time, I would like to read 6, start at 6, so that we can not just sort of start in the middle of the story. Let's just do 1 through 8, verses 1 through 8 of Genesis chapter 6. Does someone want to read that?
Okay, when men began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives and they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he made man on the earth. I like that word, regretted. And it grieves him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man who I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Okay, you can stop there. So that's just a recap of everything we've talked through. We talked through the regret thing last week. So if you guys are interested, go back. Essentially, it's not that he's like, oh, I shouldn't have made humanity. It's I'm grieved and I have compassion and pity the fact that I have made humanity because of how wayward they have gone. And so now with that, we're going to go ahead and get into the story of Noah. Starting at verse 9. These are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood, and make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its width, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark, and finish it to a cubit above, and put the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For my part, I'm going to bring a flood of waters on the earth and destroy from under heaven all flesh which is beneath, or in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, of the animals according to their kinds, and of every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind, 2 of every kind shall come into you, to keep them alive. Also take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Okay, so now we're going to get into the story proper. You guys ready? Okay. Starting at verse 1 of chapter 7. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and its mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and its mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the air also, male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came on the earth. And Noah, with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, and as God had commanded Noah. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah with his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons entered the ark, and they and every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every bird of every kind, every bird, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God has commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. Okay, I'm going to pause just for a second. I'm not going to go into the slides, but have you guys taken notice of the repetitive, poetic nature of the story? It's repeating itself a lot. It's got some very specific numbers involved. So I just want you guys to recognize that as you're reading through it. Okay?
What do they mean by clean and not clean?
Great question. Yeah, so that's one of these things where if you know what anachronism means, we're taking things of the future and we're inserting them into the past. And so it's talking about the Levitical law, the difference between clean and unclean animals that are to be used in the sacrifice. It's a classification of this kind of animal is to be used in sacrifice. This kind of animal is to not be used in sacrifice. Does that make sense? So it's a classification in later parts of the story, okay? When we get into Leviticus. Yeah, in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and things like that, yeah. Okay, so we're going to continue. Just now that we had a little bit of a breather. We stopped at verse 16. The Lord shut him in. Verse 17. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. The waters swelled so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters swelled above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, domestic animals, wild animals, all swimming creatures that swarm on the earth, or all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all human beings. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, human beings and animals and creeping things and birds of the air. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the water swelled on the earth for 150 days. Chapter 8. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals, and all the domestic animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind to blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. And the fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed, and the rain from the heavens was restrained. And the waters gradually receded from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains appeared. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made, and sent out the raven, and it went to and fro till the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent out the dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set its foot, and it returned to him in the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took it and brought it into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent out the dove, and it did not return to him any more. Verse 13. In the 600th year, in the 601st year, in the 1st month of the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked and saw the face of the ground was drying. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God said to Noah, "Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and your sons' wives with you. Bring out every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out with his sons and his wives and his sons' wives, and every animal, creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the ground, went out of the ark by families. I'm going to pause again there just to help you recognize, again, that poetic pattern. So you find that in sections of the Bible here, it's so interesting that God will say something, right? He'll say to do something, and then he'll say that Noah did something in the same manner at which it was said to do something. There's a repetition here. I'm not doing it justice in my reading of it, but there's like a cadence almost that you have to bring about, because it's that repetitive verse, that repetitive poetic nature, right? So just another pause there. Everyone doing good? We're reading through a lot right now. Okay? Verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, "I will never again curse the ground because of humankind. For the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth, nor will I never again destroy every living thing, creature as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." Chapter 9. God blessed Noah and his sons, and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth, and on every bird of the air, and on everything that creeps on the ground, and on all the fish of the sea, for into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and just as I give you the green plants, I give you everything. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For your own lifeblood I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal I will require it, and from human beings, each one for the blood of another I will require a reckoning for human life. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human shall that person's blood be shed. For in his own image God made humankind." Verse 7. And you, be fruitful and multiply, abound on the earth and multiply in it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and when the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." Now we're going to officially pause here, because I'm not going to get into Noah and his sons just yet, the tent thing, because that's another weird story. But yeah, but we'll get into it. Hopefully we won't have to just skip over it, because it's important. But yeah, so that's the story of the flood. You guys ready to get into it? All right, let's do it. Any immediate things that are jumping out at you as we talk about every time? That was a lot, so there probably was 100 things, but obedience, okay. Yeah, so the idea is Noah is, as I said, the one out of all of them that is selected to preserve human life through the flood, and he's able to do that through his obedience. It says he did all the Lord that commanded him, right? Okay.
Noah and his wife were given like the same instructions that God gave Adam and Eve.
Excellent. So yeah, so did you guys notice the parallels between the end of the flood narrative, and one-to-one parallels between that and the Genesis chapter 1, what we read a few weeks ago? Be fruitful and multiply. Okay.
Another couple things I saw. One is Noah walked with God, which was also a garden image.
Yeah.
And an Enoch. But there was also that God provided a wind over the surface of the water.
Yeah. Oh man, it's so excellent. A ruach. Yep.
The number 2.
Okay. Yeah. Lots of numbers, lots of months and dates, right? Any thoughts about that? Why is it so specific about the times of certain things happening? Try to think through an ancient mindset.
Numbers, I'm guessing, is symbolic.
Okay, so there are symbolic numbers. We're associating the numbers with months, though. What are months? Divisions of time throughout the year, right?
Order to it.
Yep, there's an order to it, and there's a specific, within the context of, let's say, Hebrew culture, there's specific events associated with specific months. So an example of that would be the 7th month of the year is the month in which you have the Feast of Tabernacles and the dedication of the temple in Jerusalem, right? And on what month did the ark land on Mount Ararat? On the 7th month. Okay? So think about these things in, that mindset of how would someone who's steeped in the scriptures and in sort of the culture of ancient Israel, how would they be thinking about month 2 and month 7 and you see what I'm saying? Okay.
I don't know. I just think a little differently, I guess. Like, I get the hard times of trying to swim and swim and swim. For 40 days, that's a lot of swimming. The destruction. But when I was growing up as a kid, we always see Noah's Ark. And the animals sticking their heads out. But that's only one place on Earth. That's a little place on Earth. None of the pictures I seen was the whole world drowning with destruction.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying about the animals is that the coolest thing that I see as well, that's kind of cool, is that all of those animals were inside of a boat. Like, the cages, I mean, how do you keep that kind of animals in a cage without, it must have been ferociously really noisy, unless God had those animals be still. He can do that.
Yeah, kind of like Jesus calming the waters, yeah. So you brought up a good point, the question between a regional and a global flood. So we'll get into that later on in the meeting, but yeah.
It related to the animals. I have
loved also, in that he didn't just protect humanity made in his image, but he also protected the animals.
Mhm.
His promise at the end is between you and me and every living creature.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we forget, as much as humankind is special in that we are made in God's image, it doesn't mean that the rest of his creation is worthless.
Right.
He very much cares for his creation.
Yeah.
From the beginning, and even after he writes those stuff, he's still saying all of the creatures, like,
Excellent
it's just
point.
something to remember.
Yeah.
Can I just say this?
Mhm.
And I don't know, it's for like when he says two of everything, it, in my mind, I'm thinking of how he made Eve
Mhm.
to help Adam
Mhm.
to reproduce.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the two of a female of the animals, like he was saying, to reproduce.
Mhm. Yeah.
Of life.
He wants to preserve all life, right? Through the cleansing that needs to happen, there needs to be creatures that come out of that are in continuity with the old, right? Because he loves his creatures.
And just as said, that was verse 3, and also 7 pairs. So there you go with the 7, a perfect number of every bird, male and female. So it just wasn't like 2 hippos, male and female, and 2 giraffes, male and female. Like, there's one, but there are also 7 pairs.
You have the right hippos and giraffes are both not clean animals, though. So yeah.
There were 7 pairs.
I gotcha. No, I understand. Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe giraffes. No, I don't know if giraffes would be clean, but no, you're right. You're right. Yeah. No, sorry. It was 1 pair of unclean, 7 pair of clean, I believe. Yeah. 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 But you have the right idea. It would have to be the clean animals, though, the sheep and the,
So
yeah.
it was just, for them to reproduce, but it was also, those were like the food for Noah and his family.
There, yeah. So ceremonial aspects. So you asked about the difference. Why make these classifications, right? It's because what that's framing for you is that Noah is a priest, right? There's a priestly role, priestly function that's going on here, right? It's the story of a flood. It's the story of the destruction of the world, but you have a priesthood in the midst of that. That's the one that's building the ark, right? And classifying these animals in this priestly role. And we haven't gone too deep into what is the meaning of a priest just yet, but we talked about Adam and Eve as priests in the garden, right? I briefly talked about them. What a priest is a priest represents God to humanity and humanity to God, right?
I'll never be able to ask this again, so I'm gonna.
Okay.
The rainbow is 7 colors, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Oh, and the wonderful thing is that that we have the rainbow, which is a promise that every time we see it, it's God. But was there rainbows before? I mean, there was rain and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I'm asking, hey, Cameron, maybe.
Were there rainbows before? That's such a wild question to me because
That was the first rain.
Yeah, okay, so this is really interesting. I'm sorry to cut off, because there's this guy named Kent Hovind.
Mhm.
Oh, but he has a whole theory on, in terms of if you wanted to interpret this more literally, how that could be, and how waters above, waters below, and what the earth could have looked like before, and then when that waters above actually started raining down, when those waters from the deep that just water everything, but now they came bursting
Right.
forth and stuff. So now the earth has changed, and so now the earth after the flood is a different kind of earth now, because it's not hyper-oxygenated, things aren't getting super big. There's a whole scientific thing to where, now rainbows come because now we have rain and clouds, stuff that we didn't before. And so even though science, from the science world, we can say, okay, so that's why we have rainbows now, but before, so we can say that was the first rain, and I'm being really.
I like how you're tracking. Yeah. Or I'm tracking with you.
It's hard to explain, but scientifically you can see how science-wise, I'm a science nerd.
Yeah.
Science, though, for me, still, affirms what the Bible is describing. If these waters are bursting from the deep, that could have carved the Grand Canyon pretty quickly.
Gotcha.
That kind of thing.
Sure.
And so, and again, the waters from above, now this different earth that was there, if all that water is now raining down, now you have a different kind of earth. Now you have these clouds and rainbows, and God saying, "This is now how it's going to be because I made it this way now, and that rainbow is going to be there as my sign." But we can say scientifically how rainbows now are created, but from a biblical understanding, we can get a different spiritual understanding as to why they're all.
That's cool. Yeah. I think she explained it. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. I'll just add my thing and just say, so the first video that I sent was talking about the priority should be to understand the theology and what the story is trying to tell you. And he essentially says, like, you want to make sure you get all that right before you try to even work on the science, and the scientific questions, which I really appreciate. And at the same time, the second video that I sent had a bunch of scientific stuff in it. So that's all I'll direct you towards is maybe the second video. I don't know anything. So yeah, so I'll just say that. Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, well, mine maybe unimportant, but my translation says that it's a different kind of wood. It says gopher wood.
Okay.
Cypress wood. So why?
Gopher, I believe, is translators are unsure of what gopher wood. And so my translation probably made an interpretive guess. Yeah. Yeah. So no, yeah, exactly. So well, it's a word that like translators are just, they don't know what word this is necessarily referring to. But there's also a rhyming. There was a video that talked about the rhyming of that. Gopher and Kofar is the Hebrew for pitch or something like that. So who knows why it is saying that, if that makes sense. Yep, one more. Sorry, we gotta get into the slides, guys.
Okay, I was reading in Genesis, and when God created the vault and the sky, and he put the water above and the water below. So the sky was the water above, was it? Or
so if you think back to our meetings on cosmology on Genesis 1, remember that the waters, they don't represent H2O, okay? It's not like water, like what is in your water bottle, okay? You could say that there's a connection there, but it's a representative image for chaos and decreation and disorder, okay? So when he said, so what's inside the dome is the sun, moon, and stars, remember? The dome represents sort of the barrier between the universe and what is non-universe, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it also represents that is visually, symbolically manifest to your eyes as the dome of the sky. When you go outside and you look all around you, it looks like you're in a snow globe. You know what I mean? And so the idea here is that there's something beyond just what I'm looking at. Yeah, if that makes sense. And that the realm, I can't go into the sky and I can't go into the waters. These are realms that I can't go into the waters at the edge of the creation, right? So if you go to the end of the land, it's like if you can't go any further, you start to die. You know what I mean? You're going to drown in the water. Same thing above. You can't ascend into those heavens. Yeah. So the dome represents sort of not disorder or non-order, right? Or it represents that as which is holding back the non-order. Okay. Let's get into the slides, guys, and then we'll address more questions as we continue, if that's all right. Okay. So yes, Noah walked with God. Noah walked with God. Bob has already brought it up multiple times, but Enoch walked with God. What is this referring to? Remember back in Genesis chapter 3, the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the wind of the day, right? So, and then he asks, where are you? Where are you, right? So God is looking for someone to walk with. God is looking and waiting for the man who will walk with him, right? Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Do you want to expound on that, or?
So, like, when you think about, like, man and woman, God always has a companion. Like,
Okay.
He wants to be our companion.
The marriage of the Lord is your husband. Yeah, that's great. So when it says that, this person walked with God, Enoch walked with God, Noah walked with God, right? The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been the shepherd all my life, Jacob is saying this. This idea of someone who is standing alongside, walking under his leading, right? It says that he was walking in the garden, and it's this sort of idea, this symbol of those who join and partner with God to walk hand in hand with him, right? And so Noah is said to be one who walks with God, righteous and blameless in his generation. What does that mean? Oh my gosh. The word of the Lord. There we go. Sorry. Yeah, no, it's funny. It's fine. What makes him righteous and blameless?
I would imagine he could be so, right? So if he's blameless, then he doesn't blame.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay.
No sin?
Well, he's not sinless.
Just the heart posture.
Okay, the heart posture. Heart posture of what?
Heart posture of Noah.
Yeah, what is his heart posture?
Oh, well, he reveres God, so like he's imperfect, but everything that he does is ultimately how God first.
Righteousness comes by what?
Obedience. Yeah, how long did he build that ark?
Well, hang on. Wait, let's stay here. The righteous shall live by their what? Faith. Okay. Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Yes. Okay. So the idea here is the obedience, it's not that which brings righteousness. The obedience is because of his righteousness. And the righteousness is there because of his faith. Okay?
So he's looking to God. He's hearing from God. He's doing what God said.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the obedience. Yeah. Just remember the order of that. It's the faith brings the righteousness, brings the obedience. Okay? Does that make sense? The faith brings the righteousness, brings the obedience. But the point here that I'm trying to make is Noah is righteous, it says, in his generation, right? And it's the idea that there is an entire civilization, an entire world that is not like Noah, that he alone is this person who is going to be chosen by God. Remember, the chosen one motif is very, very important, right? Abraham is chosen among all the nations of the world. David is chosen, this lowly shepherd boy, out of all the people in Israel. Mary is chosen, a teenager from the house of David in this small backwater town of Nazareth. These chosen ones, right, who are unique not just because they are unique, but unique because God has chosen them to be a certain way and chosen them to act and be moved, in a certain way in the story, that they're going to play a pivotal role. That's really important in the story of the Bible. Really, really important. You won't understand the story of Abraham without understanding that, right? And they're chosen because of the faith, which brings the righteousness, which brings the obedience. Okay? Does that make sense? That they are willing to walk with God and walk in his direction.
Yeah, I think the story is so beautiful just because Noah's family were knuckleheads.
Yeah.
And Noah's, the identity that God saved them because the obedience behind Noah's.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
When they brought that man from the rooftop, it didn't say that man had faith. Jesus said, your friends have faith. I'm going to save you.
Okay.
It's a comparison.
Yeah, that's interesting. You make a good point that Noah and his sons both are going to undergo an issue at the end of the story, which goes to show that these figures that are chosen by God, time and again, they have problems, right? They still have that sin problem. And what the story is presenting ultimately is the point that God is going to partner and pair himself with people of humanity that are willing to work with him, even if they have these problems, right? Even if they make horrible mistakes, which they are going to. The amount of times Abraham screws up, it's wild, right? I heard someone say once, if you just omit all the times the text says, and God blessed this person, and God wanted to work with this person and stuff like that, you just would not assume that is part of the story, right? It's not natural for you to think that, oh, this person is blessed and favored by God. You know what I mean? Look at all the ways they're screwing up or they're being screwed up, by the decisions that they're making. So just an interesting little exercise there. You have something?
That I think the chosen one theme is in our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see it in other religions. It's a Hollywood theme.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah.
The
Matrix, yeah.
Neo, the chosen one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I just think that it's something that has survived, that whole concept that there's a chosen.
C.S. Lewis makes a incredible point about how the whole universe is organized that way. Out of a billion stars, Earth, right? The chosen planet. So anyway.
We say the same thing that like the whole precipice of God is like selectivity.
Yeah. I think it was in that C.S. Lewis video that I sent you. Yeah. Anyway, something interesting. But the point here, again, the point that I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that all of humanity is going one way. You have a certain subset of people that is looking forward to the coming of Noah. And then when Noah comes, everyone is placing their hope in this person, right? This individual who will be the salvation of man. You see what I'm saying? That God is going to use this man to bring forth a preservation of life. It's really important when you think about the pattern of what Christ is going to be doing, right? When he comes, that it's a representative one in whom the whole world is saved. Okay?
So just real quick, I don't want to make you drift, but on the part here where it says, "Never again will I destroy all the living creatures as I have done." That made me think of Armageddon.
Mm-hmm.
But in Armageddon, it talked about 1/3 of this area will be destroyed. So maybe that's where that could fall in.
Yeah.
Play.
Let me get closer to the end of the thing, and we'll talk about the day of the Lord and Armageddon and things like that. Does that sound okay? Yeah. So maybe just put a bookmark, and we'll get there. Yeah.
Let me,
No. Just we'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah, I appreciate that though. Yeah. So Noah is said to build a teva, an ark, right? So we think ark, and we know what it's talking about. Ark. It's not the word for boat. That's the first thing that I need to tell you. It's not the word for boat. The ancient term used for ark does not mean boat as we think about it. Having an originally Egyptian source, the word teva implies a container that is built to house something sacred and precious, particularly an idol, right? Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant. That's going to be a different Hebrew word, but it's similar. It's a similar reference. The vessel that Noah builds is designed to withstand the storm and protect it within the remnants of the remnants of God's creatures, in continuity with Genesis chapter 1. So this vessel, this container, needs to represent and house something. Okay, what does that make you think of? The creatures of Genesis 1, the idol of Genesis 1, the image of God goes inside the container. What does that hearken to?
Ark of the Covenant.
Ark of the Covenant. Think backwards, though. This container in which the creatures of God's creation, the garden, which is in the midst of a wilderness, right? But what else? It's floating on the waters, okay? The dome itself, all of creation. The ark is a miniature creation model, okay? It's housing the image, it's housing the creatures, it's a preservation against the waters, right? So it's that which is built to withstand cosmic flooding. It is crucial to note that the ark is more like a raft than it is anything like a boat. After all, it lacks sails, rudders, and a steering wheel, and Noah is no sailor. The ark acts as God's provision of safety through the judgment of the flood upon the world of prehistory. In the midst of the flood, the ark serves to be a makeshift miniature creation floating on top of the chaos waters, a dwelling place for humanity, a new Eden garden. With the priest, Noah, his family, and the animal creatures secured in an ordered realm, the original intended creation is preserved through the destruction of the old world, all because God's immense mercy and love. So he brings all of creation into a miniature model, and he brings destruction upon the world to bring forth a resurrection, a redemption. So we have decreation, right, through sin and violence. These kingdoms of the world, this destruction of humanity through sin and violence, and a distortion, a corruption of the land, a corruption of the earth, right? That's what's going on in this. Remember, do you guys remember this image of the dome and the sort of this biblical cosmology? If you don't, you can go back through the class recording on that topic. So what does he do? He separates the waters with the dome, remember? And then what is going on here? The waters, they flood back in, okay? It says all the windows of the sky opened up, right? And all the springs of the deep burst forth. Right? So God releases the chaos waters that he separated and bound back in Genesis 1, cleansing the world and preserving Noah and the ark through the waters in a prefigurement of baptism. We'll get into that. The result is a new world in continuity with the old, but now a refreshed one. Okay?
Are you saying that the flood wasn't actually the flood of water?
I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm trying to demonstrate that the Bible is getting at more than that. Does that make sense?
This is the rainbows and the saving of the animals. That's all good. This is the saddest story of all time.
It is sad.
He destroyed everyone.
Yeah. It is sad, but it's not sad. It's not tragic. I wouldn't say it's tragic. It's gloriously sad. The idea here is that God is doing something to continue. It's not about God killing as much as it is God continuing through. That humanity is so corrupt, so perverse, that he has to do something about it. In his justice is his mercy, and we're going to get into this. It would be unmerciful for God to not do something about it. So it's God coming and acting to save more than it is him just simply coming to act and destroy. And those are one and the same thing in this story, but you have to frame it that way, that it's not willy-nilly. God is doing something purposefully and intentionally, right? But I'm trying to represent to you guys that the idea here is the destruction of creation, in the same way that creation was ordered back in Genesis 1, now it is being disordered again, or unordered. He's bringing unorder so that he can refresh the world. He's bringing the world through death so that it can be reborn again. Okay?
So he has to cleanse it, huh?
Yeah. A cleansing, a death and destruction to bring about new life. Okay? Which is the big pattern of the entire good book. Okay? Sorry, you're going to say
I
something?
was going to ask a question, but it's like, I was going to ask, okay, why not just do everything the same and then just start with Adam and Eve? Just try again.
So you mean go back to Genesis 1 entirely?
Yeah, but 2.0.
Well, there is a 2.0 aspect to this. And Adam is represented in Noah. So Noah is a new type of Adam, and we'll get into that. God is not going to redeem Adam if he just let's say, puts the whole universe into non-existence and just starts the timeline over. You see what I'm saying? That literally just says, I messed up, scrap it. What we're doing here is not a picture. It's not a picture of God building something and then it getting messed up and him just destroying it and then deciding, oh, I'll just grab all new materials and I'll just start up again. That's not what's happening here. There's a continuity, a redemption of what was already created because that was still deemed good but corrupted. God still loves Adam and Eve, right? And he still has a plan and a purpose for humanity. He's not just going, if that same continuity of humanity, he's not going to just scrap it completely. You see what I'm saying? That's what's represented in the ark. That's what the ark represents. A passing away of that which needs to go, but a preservation of the core, right? That which is going to be sustained.
Like baptism.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Precisely. It's important for you guys to get this point that what God does in your baptism, in your death and rebirth, is it's still you, but you are being regenerated. You are being renewed. You are being restored. It's still you. That's really important. Okay. just thought I would get at that. So
When God gives us, like, He still has to give us a choice, and there's He has to show the consequence of sin too. So, and then His ways aren't our ways, so we can't really understand, God's whole plan.
yeah, but
Process.
when that process, when you're in the moment, you can't understand it. But when you come to the fulfillment and the end of it, which is kind of what we're getting at with the Jesus thing, that Jesus is going to, and the story of the New Testament is going to bring all this and make it clear, right? Make it completely clear that what happens when you go under the baptism waters? You die to your old, right? And you're raised to the new life. Hey, yeah, there's your shirt. You're raised to new life. Yeah. So the flood represents the whole world undergoing that. The whole world, which is an old world, undergoing that, right? So the flood, the judgment and end of the prehistoric world, destruction of the original Nephilim and their kingdoms, the decreation of the ancient human civilizations of old, the preservation of life in the vessel, which is a new kind of creation and a new kind of temple. It is a microcosm. It is a singularity, a place in which all the world is gathered up into this point that is preserved through the waters, and then it's all going to come out again. God's response to the violence and utter rebellion of humanity, God's answer to the cry of humanity, that's something else that we have to understand. The flood, for those who are the ones being oppressed and killed, probably a good thing. What has been demonstrated is that there has also been the kinds of people who have called on the name of the Lord, who have wanted him to bring justice to bear on this awful society, right? It's God giving the creation back over to chaos, to non-order, and God granting violent humanity what it deserves, which is the judgment, right? The judgment that he rightfully is able to bring upon the world. Okay? You guys understand what the flood represents?
Choice too. God gives us a choice.
Right. Yeah. And that's, well, again, thinking about Noah walked with God. And so humanity is preserved through the judgment. But we have to continue, okay? Remember that there's a chiasm in the whole story. So how we have an ascending and descending repetitive pattern. Not only do we have that, but we also have a one-to-one mirror with Genesis chapter 1. So again, noting that this is a recreation narrative, right? So in Genesis chapter 1, the land was wild and waste, darkness was over the deep, and the ruach of God was hovering over the waters. And then in Genesis chapter 8, God caused a ruach to pass over the land and the waters recede. In Genesis chapter 1, you have the separation of the waters above and the waters below. In Genesis chapter 8, this is the flood is going away now. The springs of the deep and the windows of the heaven are closed. In Genesis chapter 1, on day 3, the waters gather into one place and dry ground appears and vegetation comes out of the land. In Genesis chapter 8, on day 3, the tops of the mountains appear and the dove returns with an olive branch. You guys see how it's a reordering. It's a return back to what was established in Genesis 1. God is remaking the world, okay? But it's in continuity with the old. That is the point. Okay? Does that make sense? I'm not going to go over everything. I want you guys to remember, do you remember what this is?
Yeah, that is one of your earlier videos.
So this is the earliest map in the world, right? It's the earliest map of the world in the world. And one of the significant things about this map is that it has on it a designation of here's where the ark is if you want to go see the ruins of the ark, okay? This is not an Israelite map. This is a Babylonian map, okay? And so now we're shifting gears a little bit beyond the meaning of the text, and we're just going to get into the sort of that ancient history aspect. I said that when ancient people were living, this was not a biblical story. This was just a story of human history. Like this was just history. You know what I mean? And that's because they all had this narrative in their cultures. So yeah, this map of the world, it will direct you to where the Noah's Ark is, right? I'm going to read to you some other non-biblical flood accounts. How does that sound? Okay. So this is from Gilgamesh, the story of Gilgamesh. So Gilgamesh spoke to Utnapishtim. Tell me how it is that you stand in the assembly of the gods and have found life. Utnapishtim said to him, to Gilgamesh, let me reveal to you, O Gilgamesh, a hidden matter and a secret of the gods. Let me tell you. The great gods resolved to send the deluge. Everyone knows deluge just means, okay. It just means flood. He repeated their plans to the reed hut. Forsake possessions, seek life, build an ark and save life. Take aboard ship, seed of all living things, the ship which you shall build. Let her dimensions be measured off. What silver I had, I loaded upon her. What gold I had, I loaded upon her. What living creatures I had, I loaded upon her. I made go aboard all my family and my kin, beasts of the steppe, wild animals of the steppe, and all skilled craftsmen I made go aboard. I set up an offering on the top of the mountain. So, very similar story here about this figure that is building an ark and bringing things on. Obviously, the presentation is a little different. The details are different, but it's the same story of the flood and the ark, and then the offering that is made on the top of the mountain afterwards. Okay, bringing whatever he had, pure animals he slaughtered, cattle, fat animals he chose and brought aboard, the birds flying in the heavens, the cattle, the creatures of the steppe he brought on board. The flood came forth, its power came upon the peoples like a battle. One person did not see another, they could not recognize each other in the catastrophe. The deluge bellowed like a bull, the wind resounded like a scrambling eagle, the darkness was dense, the sun was gone. So that's not the same one. That's a different one.
That's a different. Yeah, a lot of similarities.
So that's the Gilgamesh epic. That's Atrahasis. Okay, here's another one. You guys ready? Two more. By our hand, a flood will sweep over the cities. The decision that mankind is to be destroyed has been made. A verdict, a command of the assembly cannot be revoked. All the evil winds, all the stormy winds gathered into one, and with them, then the flood was sweeping over the cities, the half-bushel baskets for 7 days and 7 nights. After the flood had swept over the country, after the wind had tossed the big boat about on the great waters, the sun came out, spreading light over the heaven and earth. You guys see what we're doing here? How, when you're reading this story, you are reading, like I said, the oldest and most standard of all stories is the story of the flood. That this is a conventional understanding that if you were living in the ancient world, no matter what culture you're in, they all understand that the flood is something that took place in their ancient history. Here's another one. Kronos appeared to Xerxes in a dream and revealed that on the 15th month, Dionysos, I don't know how to pronounce it, mankind would be destroyed by a great flood. Then he ordered him to bury together all the tablets in first, the middle, and the last, and hide them in Sippar, the city of the sun. Then he was to build a boat and board it with his family and his best friends. He was to provision it with food and drink, and also to take on board wild animals and birds of all four-footed animals. He broke open a seam on the side of the ship and saw that the ship had come to rest on a mountain. He disembarked, accompanied by his wife and daughter, and together the steersman. He prostrated himself in worship to the earth and set up an altar and sacrifice to the gods. So that's a Greek version. Okay? How do you feel about that? What do you think about that?
It just confirms, what Genesis was talking about.
Why do you say that?
Well, even on the mentioned the 7 days and 7 nights, so it's still.
There's some details that are consistent, some details that are different, though.
Yeah, I know I said the 15th month where we had the 17th, but yeah, there's a lot of consistency.
Consistency in the general points is the main point. That this is a understood story. So think in your own day, think back to a conventional story that we all know about. What would be an example of that? 9/11. That's a good example. Do you need to read the sources to know about 9/11? No, you just know that it's a thing that happened. None of us read a book about it, but we just sort of understand, just as part of culture, as part of our zeitgeist, that 9/11 is something that has happened, right?
So just trying to understand who wrote that. So were these the descendants? Because if the earth was destroyed, then only Noah's family was, and so was this offspring from Noah's family that wrote this?
Right. So the idea here is that when humanity gets up and running again, they're telling this story, and as the different cultures and different kingdoms come about, they're going to continue telling this story. And
It's interesting though that right here is using some other name instead of Noah. It says Zeuthris.
yeah. Okay, so pause there. I just want to address, and then we'll talk about that.
It was actually just the same question. If the flood had destroyed every living thing, I was just about to ask if it was through Noah's offspring. That
We're going to get into that genealogy aspect.
Yeah. So yeah, the idea here is that, let's say this event, for the sake of argument, the event happens, right? We all assume that event happens. And then the story of that event happens and is passed down through the generations, right? And kingdoms and cultures, they continue on with that story. Essentially, it's the same tradition that they're telling, just different iterations of that same tradition. And that gets into your question. Well, why is he not called Noah? Noah is a Hebrew word. Okay? This happens prior to the Hebrew people ever living. Even the biblical version is going to be describing this story in Hebrew terms. But the story happens at one point in history and has all these iterations of people telling the story. The reason we take the Hebrew version as inspired scripture is because of Jesus. If you're in ancient Greek, you have the version of this story in the Greek, and then you become a Christian and people tell you about Jesus, about this man that lived, 100 years ago, that died and rose again. And now you're reading the Jewish scriptures. You have the same story. It's just they're using different words to talk about the story, and it has a different ultimate meaning.
Well,
if that makes sense.
Says, the city of the sun.
You're right. So they have different details to their story. They have different legends associated with their stories too. You see what I'm saying?
The same thing is like when people say like this has been translated so many times. It's like, well, it's been translated, yes, and so it may say different things, but the message is
the same. Yeah, exactly. In all the different languages. Yeah.
The Hams come from Canaanites. Doesn't get your dad back.
The Canaanites come from Ham. Yeah, there you go. But we'll get into. Are you guys getting at what I'm saying? What I'm saying here? It's the same conventions. You could say there are in the same way that there are competing traditions on the creation of the giants and the Nephilim, on the same way that there are competing traditions on the dawn of creation. I mean, I've shown you these. I showed you at the beginning. I showed you the Enuma Elish, right, about the creation story, the Babylonian creation story. I also showed you that there are the Apkallu story and the story of the creation of the descent of the gods and the giants and things like that. And now I'm showing you that there's also a one-to-one. This is what I was getting at when we're talking about prehistory and what Genesis 1-11 is doing. It's telling the same kinds of stories that are being told by the other cultures. The point here is what it's saying, what it's revealing to you about the character of man and the character of God. That's where it's different. It's agreeing on the points of history, disagreeing on the meaning, the ultimate point, the ultimate theological message that you're supposed to derive. Because the story where the gods send a flood because humans are crazy and noisy and too loud and waking them from their slumbers, right? That's a different story than Almighty God is grieved at the violence of humankind. Does that make sense?
Right. Like that story would be like sinful, right? Missing the point.
It's a love story, not the destruction.
It's a love story, not those humans are a nuisance story. Yeah, good point.
It's because I love you.
Don't think about it like a spanking. That's not what it is. But you can think about it like tough love. You can think about it like tough love. But anyway, but not in an abusive way. Yeah.
Do you know if this was a worldwide or localized?
That's the next slide. Yeah. Okay, so
good job.
So you all have been wondering probably that same question is, what do we mean by worldwide versus localized flood, right? So some people, when they want to present what is going on in this story, want to present it as though it's like the entire globe of the earth is covered in water, besides a little boat.
Well, mostly the world is.
Right? Yeah, it is. But the idea here is that all land over, you could say, Antarctica, Australia, and Canada, that all of those places are covered simultaneously. That's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is that this is a regional flood. This is describing a flood that happens in a specific area at a specific point in time that is only relevant because humans were living in that area only at that time. So that's another question. How are we feeling about that? What do you guys think? And before you answer, let me ask you this. If Noah and his family is 8 people in all, and they're telling this story, how would they know about a flood in Australia? That's how I'm going to just pose that question to you right now, but I want to hear from you. Like, what do you think?
Okay, there are so many different ideas. So off the top of my head right now, I'm thinking the flood, because God does talk about earth and world. So when he's flooding things, he's definitely going to be flooding the known populated world. And for them, it could be regional. You talk about a dove flying out. It can only fly so far. It cannot fly to Australia and come back, right? So it can only fly so as far as it could go, right? There wasn't any land until so much time. But who's to say that that same thing that happened in that region didn't happen in different regions around the world? Because for me, in the same way that God chose Adam and Eve as this, representative of him in this temple complex and the whole world, and they have their sons, but Cain gets sent out and he says, wait, they're all going to kill me. There's other people. I still think in the same way, Noah and his family are pulled out, but I still think there could be other populations all over the continents of the world. This is happening all over the world. And who's to say that this deluge and flooding didn't happen all over the world? And it's mostly wiping out the known populations at that time. That's why you have these different stories even from around the world. Their region, this is what happened, but who's to say that didn't happen in other places around?
Yeah. So my only response, it's a great point that you're making. My only response to that would be, then you have to assume that there are survivors besides Noah in these other places.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Is that
Right.
there are, because it even says, you talk about the Nephilim,
Yeah.
they're there in these days and afterwards. After what? And so I do assume that there are others that are still.
Yeah, and that's totally up to you whether I think the point that I'm trying to make, I'm not really going to go through this slide. I'm trying to help you understand that the cosmology of the Bible is the key. They're not thinking about a globe. They just are not thinking about how we conceive of. And I just want you to imagine, let's say you're standing on the moon with a telescope during the time of the flood, and you're looking at the earth. I'm just wondering what you think you would be seeing. Is it a big blue ball? Maybe. I'm not going to tell you whether or not I think that. I want you to think about, is that what the ancient Israelite is thinking about? That's not what the ancient Israelite is thinking about.
Again, you got to figure out like who's writing this. Again, 2 and 4.
Absolutely.
So in their aspect, again, I think it's a regional thing, but us looking at this from a
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be, it could be the case. I'm not trying to get any particular perspective out on you. I'm trying to say that like the way that like people will talk about the global flood, the worldwide flood in the modern day is far and away removed from what the biblical author is getting at and thinking about.
Correct.
That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, I mean, in here it says Noah was the only one who found favor. So I would assume that there wouldn't be other people, that it would just be him and his family.
Yeah. So it's up to you. It's these gaps in the narrative that it's really up to you to sort of figure out and understand that the details are not what matter as much as the meaning. Okay. So when we use the word Earth, we often mean the planet upon which we live, the globe that rotates and revolves around the sun in the expanse of outer space. The biblical writer did not know about the globe, nor about space, nor Australia, Greenland, the Americas, or Antarctica. At the very least, to conceive of a global flood is to read into the text modern cosmologies that they did not assume. Okay? That's my main point. Scientifically speaking, if you want to conclude for yourself that there was a global flood, that's up to you. It is interesting also that Genesis 10 will outline all of the nations of the world, and it's only about as far as this is concerned, right? So that's something else. Genesis 10 and we'll get into this next week, provides a textual map that actually outlines the regional boundaries of the nations, the outer reaches of the biblical conception of the entire world. Okay?
Where's Turkey at on that map?
Right up here.
So what? So let's say let's say if our descendants come from Noah and everything, so how are we to know? Because I get asked this question from time to time. So how do we? So did the Chinese, China get the descendant? Because we're so different. And then I've heard things like, well,
you're so different.
Of our because of the culture, we adapt. Like we have more sun, or there's more rain.
Adaptation to environment. Well, I was going to say you and me are so different than Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth would have been too. So because they're coming from Mesopotamia. So we can't get into that topic. Yeah. I apologize.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I would assume that like the flood was like a worldwide kind of thing because like scientists have found like fish fossils and whale fossils on top of Mount Everest. So like how else would they get there?
Yeah. So that's a good question, and again, that's a scientific question. I wouldn't be able to answer that question for you. The point that I'm trying to make here, guys, is what's most important is understanding that there was a flood, and it most certainly happened at least, let's just all agree, at least in this region. Does that make sense? Because this is where Noah and his family lived, and this is where they landed. Does that make sense? Are you following me there? That's what's most important. Whether or not there was a flood anywhere else, we at least know there was one here. Which, if you are of the scientific mind that says that there wasn't a global flood, because some people have problems with that, they have problems with the science of it. It's a much more reasonable claim in their view to say that there was a really big flood. Some scientists say that created the Black Sea. Like there's the Black Sea, south of Russia. Literally that like these water basins up in the north, they like broke open essentially. And so there's a lot there. There's also the Younger Dryas event period. This event where like a meteor comes into the atmosphere, it really heats up, it explodes in the atmosphere, it breaks up the atmosphere, and the climate goes under a like radically fast warming period in which it melts the continental glaciers essentially, and like that's another event. That's essentially the end of the ice age. So if that's something else to think about, where maybe that's the event. It's really hard to place in time when this might have happened, right? But the idea here is there is, at the very least, you can identify clear scientific evidence of a flood in the region. And this is where the story is taking place in the first place. Does that make sense? So that's ultimately what really matters is there's a mountain that is mentioned, or the mountains of Ararat. That's where the story is taking place. Okay? Does that make sense, guys?
So when the Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I have created from the face of the earth. If it's a regional flood, then that was the only place that mankind lived.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's another way of arguing it. I think that that's the holy point that I'm trying to make. And even if in the Younger Dryas event, if there was a rapid climate warming period and there were other people living at that time in these different areas, then they would have also experienced a flood too. Again, you just have to assume that he's really concerned about destroying this one region totally, but then there's survivors that's up to you as to how you want to take that. Here's something that I want to get into really fast. The assumption or the argument on a secular level that God, as presented in the Bible, is like a megalomaniac or a sociopath because of a story like this, right? Number one, the sociopathic accusation is very just ironic because it's talking about God's feelings all the time. You know what I mean? And so it's like a sociopath is someone who doesn't feel things, right? And it's just really interesting how that's, he's presented as undergoing this grief for the state of humanity and the world and stuff like that. But I want to go into the idea of judgment because this is an important thing for us to get. Huh? Projection. Yeah, there you go. In the Bible, God's judgment is always equal to his justice, which is equal to his mercy, which is equal to his love. Being all good, God always judges justly. Being all loving, God's justice is always merciful, providing rebellious creatures countless opportunities to repent and choose life. You cannot have an all-loving God who does not also love justice. So some people will say, why doesn't God do something about evil in the world? At the same time, those people might say, how could God be so judgmental and so harsh, right? So there is an inconsistency between these two statements. Some people tend to find it easy to notice all the suffering in the world that seemingly goes unaccounted for and all of the wrongdoers that seem to get away with the harm that they do to themselves or to others. While we are quick to ask why God allows bad things to happen, we often can act morally superior when we find examples in the Bible of God taking direct action. We fail to remember that God's ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So you have to think about this is one of the moments in the Bible where God takes a heavy hand. That's a rare thing in the Bible, genuinely, okay? He is immensely patient as presented in the Bible and immensely willing to allow humans to make mistakes, okay? And it's already presented that. The point here is that it has gotten to such a point that it would be unloving for him not to put a stop to it. Something else that I want you to acknowledge, God is the giver of life, and our life is always contingent upon his will. No one ever died without God allowing it ultimately to happen. So it is philosophically impossible for God to kill in the way that humans kill. When humans kill, one creature is taking the life of another, and it is motivated by selfish reasoning and malicious intent. When God kills, he always does so lovingly and justly because these attributes are part of his very nature and are inseparable from it. Furthermore, when God kills, he simply takes back the life that he gave in the first place. Further still, God presently does not kill eternally. According to the Bible, physical death is not the end. It is the destruction of the body and the relocation of a person's soul to a different plane of existence. You have to think about these things in the complexity that is inherent within them, okay? That when God brings destruction upon the world, it's not like a man killing a man. It's God choosing to do with his creation in the same way that he chose to create them, he can choose to kill them. And that's up to him. Final judgment is coming. Okay? This is the big main point is none of this is arbitrary. There's an end point, an end goal to all of this, right? So the day of the Lord, which is first foreshadowed in the flood narrative and is spoken of throughout the Bible, is the final day in which the Creator repays each according to what they have done. On this day, those who have confessed Christ as King by faith are no longer under the curse of their sin, but instead the righteousness of Jesus is counted as their own. So Abraham, yeah, raise your hands. There you go. Yeah. So this is when Noah was righteous in his generation. Why? By his faith. By his faith in what? In Jesus. In God. It is Jesus's righteousness that is deposited to him through his faith. That's what atonement is. That's what the cross is. So on this day, the victims of history receive repayment for what evil has been done to them. And the wicked, both human and spiritual, receive full repayment for their unending evil doing. Everyone who trusts in God and chooses to live by his life-giving spirit receive a glorious new world along with their bodies returned to them, through which they may finally achieve the Edenic ideal and live with the Creator forever in the new creation. The Bible is clear. No one ever gets away with anything. So the point here is the flood, it is also pointing forward to something. It's pointing forward to an ultimate version, right? And so it does say in the text, it says that God said he will never destroy the world again with the flood, but you brought up Armageddon. And so this is what we're trying to get at here, is what happens in the final day of the Lord, right, is a transformation, is an ultimate version of this, where now humanity is ultimately liberated, ultimately transformed. Because what is happening here, remember it says God said that the intent of man's heart is always evil, even evil from its youth. A transformation hasn't happened yet, right? A cleansing of the world has happened, but a transformation has not happened yet. That has yet to take place, okay? That will take place ultimately in the new creation, okay? So there's a difference between destruction and then a refreshing, right? Versus a complete regeneration, a complete retransformation. And just to reiterate, The judgment equals the justice equals the mercy equals the love, right? He has to hold all of these things together. They're all part of his nature, okay? And God is one. God is unified in all of these things. It's not like his love competes with his justice. You see what I'm saying? That's never the case. God's love never competes with his justice. He'd be limited in that sense if it did, but he holds both together in a perfect way. How can perfect mercy be held together with perfect justice? That's God, okay? Here's a little extra reading on that. Is God a Moral Monster by Paul Copan. All right, let's just wrap up, guys. Almost done here, okay? We'll get you to church on time, and I need to text my wife that I will pick her up in a few. Hang on. In 15 minutes. Okay, we'll be done by the time of church, okay? So he lands on the mountains of Ararat. You guys good? He lands on the mountains of Ararat, right? What does this hearken to? Who said it? Said it. You're always on track. You're always on track, yeah. So remember the idea of the cosmic mountain, right? You were in Eden on the garden of God. You were in the holy mountain of God. You walked amidst the stones of fire. That's where Adam and Eve are placed in the garden. And then when they are exiled, they go into the land of death, right? And then you have the landing on the new cosmic mountain where an altar is made, a sacrifice is given, and you have the animals with the vineyard there that he plants, right? So you guys see kind of this connection about a new priesthood, a continuation of the priesthood, but in a new person, that is Noah, who now is going to represent all of humanity before God, right? In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And remember, it's a new temple vision, right? A new Eden vision, right? The idea is that we are starting again, refreshed, and that sacrifice is given. So the mountain offering, the intercession of Noah in his sacrifice officially soothes God's grief and fulfills his justice. Though God continues to acknowledge the sin nature of humanity, the thing that caused the flood in the first place, God also acknowledges the faithful trust that Noah puts in him, which is what motivated Noah's obedience up to this point. Noah fleshes out for the first time in the Bible the picture of a faithful human who is willing to partner with God to fulfill the original purpose of life. That does not make Noah sinless or perfect. He has his failings. But Noah has displayed his trust by obeying the command of the Creator and offering up his sacrifice. He serves as a type of Christ who is to come and sinlessly sacrifice once and for all. Okay, do you guys see that? That was kind of a long block of text. But the sacrifice that is made on top of the mountain by Noah represents the culmination of the story of the ark, okay, and the flood. It's now that the waters have abated, Noah prostrates himself before God. He bows before God fearfully and reverently, and he offers up his sacrifice. Remember that what are sacrifices and covenants and altars? They have to do with relationship. You guys remember that? We talked about marriage, the marriage covenant and the marriage altar a little bit, but they have to do with relationship, okay? They have to do with when you make a sacrifice and you make it and you have a covenant is formed between people through the sacrifice, through the blood sacrifice. That is a moment at which a relationship is established or rekindled, you could say. And so that is what's going on here, is this covenant that is being made, right? Noah offers up a burnt offering. Anyone know what that is? A whole offering. Whole burnt just means whole, okay? Because the whole thing is burnt. So Noah offered a burnt offering on Mount Ararat to God. While many offerings are given with the expectation that part of the offering is to be consumed by the human, the Hebrew here tells us that Noah held nothing back. He gave up everything to God as a sacrifice that is pleasing, right?
That's like the Cain and Abel is like the offering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the same sort of. So again, think about that. Think about how the ark represents this Garden of Eden temple realm. It's on the mountain, and outside of the ark is the altar that is being set up with the sacrifice. You see what I'm saying? So it's the same sort of thing where you have the garden, the wall of the garden, and then the altar on the outside where Cain and Abel are making their sacrifices. Okay?
Yes.
Paul in Romans chapter 12 says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So this idea of sacrifice, of relationship with God, It's modeled in these times in which someone is on a mountaintop, building an altar and making a sacrifice. It's this relationship where God is coming into relationship with human beings. And there's a restorative, the vision you're supposed to see is a restorative aspect to this, that this sacrifice that is being made is restoring, it's rekindling the relationship, especially with Noah as a priest. A priest represents all of humanity, right? So God, through Noah, there's a rekindling of the relationship between God and man in the sacrifice, okay? And then the covenant is what? The rainbow covenant. So we talked about rainbows a little bit. God's divine promise is that the world will never again be threatened by the chaos waters of decreation. God will be patient, slow to anger through the long and bloodied history of humanity to see them fully through to their purpose and carry out his ultimate plan of redemption. The sign of this pledge is the sky bow, the sevenfold spectrum of light shining through the water in the heavens to herald in returning sun. So the point here is that God is not going to abandon creation to destruction. He's not going to abandon them to the tyranny of their own sin. He's going to do something about it. And he won't just do something about it that just brings about an ultimate end and destruction to where they will cease to exist, but he will bring about a transformation, a restoration. He will bring them through the waters to the other side. That's what the baptism is. And that's the point that you guys have to understand. That is what the baptism represents. It represents this offering that was made by Christ. It says, for by a single offering that he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. Those who are being sanctified, it's those of us in the room who have received Christ, received his offering, and gone under the baptism, the death, right? So 1 Peter chapter 3. God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. So that's what the baptism is the salvation through the water. Not by water are they saved, but they're by passing through the water that they are saved. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also, not as the removal of dirt from the body. So it's not about the cleansing. That's something that we get wrong. The baptism is not a cleansing. It's a pledge to a clear conscience. What does that mean? Because you have already been cleansed
by the blood of Christ.
By the blood of Christ when you undergo the salvation, the baptism of the Spirit, the immersion of the Spirit, right? But then when you go into the waters of baptism, you're pledging a clear conscience before God, and that is your salvation, right? It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him.
And we do that too, right? When we confess our sins.
Yeah, that's right. But you can confess, and you can confess confidently because of that pledge of clear conscience. There is now, therefore, no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. For he made his offering, a single offering which for all time perfects humanity. And the offering that Jesus makes in history is the thing that allows Noah's sacrifice in further ancient history to come into effect. So the reason Noah's sacrifice on Mount Ararat has any meaning is because of Jesus' sacrifice, which perfects for all time. Try to wrap your mind around that a little bit. It's Noah's faith in what Jesus is going to do as manifest in the symbol of sacrifice. Okay? Questions on that? We did not get into we did not get into the tent thing. Long and short of it, so Ham saw the nakedness of his father. It could mean a lot more than he just beheld the naked body of his father, okay? Possibly it can mean, in fact, that he had sex with his mother. I can't explain why that is right now because we don't have time, okay? But the point here is that if you go into the chapters of Leviticus, there's a lot of references between the sexual ethic of the Israelites and who they are to don't have sex with this family member. Like, don't have all these incestual relationships, right? Is what these passages in Leviticus are going to be talking about. And the phrase, the idiom that is used to describe is do not see their nakedness. Okay? Do not see their nakedness. And it says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. That would be that one. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Uncover the nakedness means have sexual relations. Okay. When it's the same Hebrew language that is being used, Ham uncovered the nakedness of his father. So we can't get too deep into that. But there's this passage where Noah, he gets drunk in the tent, and then something bad happens, right? Ultimately, I want you to get a sense at that it's a cyclical pattern. You have in the exile from the garden, you have the exile, an offering that is made, and then the murder, which leads to a sort of spiral that goes murder, then, of Abel, then to Lamech, then to the giants and the flood, right? Now you have that same pattern again. You have the flood, which is a judgment. You have an offering that is made, and then some sort of sexual exploitation that happens in the tent of Noah, humanity is also going to spiral out of control again. And then it happens with Lot and his daughters. Lot, and when we get to that point, after the Sodom and Gomorrah story, Lot's daughters get Lot drunk and rape Lot so that they would get pregnant, and it's happening after a judgment. So it's the same sort of thing, these patterns that are happening. So we'll get into that. Maybe we'll talk about this story more so when we get into the Lot story, because they're definitely connected. But I want you guys to understand that what it's presenting is Noah is not the Messiah. Everything that I've gotten at here is he's looking us forward toward a messianic figure, the chosen one in whom all of humanity is going to be restored to God and saved through the water. But he's not the Messiah. There's a problem still, right? And that's going to be this sexual exploitation that happens in the tent, which we did not get to. So unfortunate about that. So what we're going to do next week is we're going to get into the Tower of Babel story, which is almost like what's going on in the Tower of Babel story is almost like we're returning back to that same sort of state that was happening pre-flood. They're building a great civilization. They're building a great empire. They're building this glorious kingdom that is deemed, evil by God. But instead of flooding the nations, instead of flooding and destroying humanity, he is now going to scatter humanity and turn them into all of these mini nations, right? Because the idea here is that he's going to keep to the Rainbow Covenant, right? So more on that next time. Thank you guys for bearing with me. I know there were a lot of questions this time around about there's a lot of questions all the time, but the flood is one of those stories. The flood is one of those stories that we have a lot of assumptions going into it because we hear about it from so early, that we don't understand the meaning necessarily. If you can take away any point, the point here is that the flood, it represents God bringing humanity through judgment, that he will bring judgment and justice upon the world, but he will preserve humanity through it. The humanity is not ultimately destroyed in the judgment, but preserved through, right? That God preserves his relationship with humans, even though it's in his love that he acts justly. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? That's the story of the flood. Okay. Thank you so much.